here in this course. So we welcome you. So Sébastien, we welcome you to our interview. You are General Director of France Ville Durable, an expert in territorial resilience and ecological transition. So formerly, you were Deputy Mayor of Besançon, Chief Resilience Officer in Paris, and you have experience in urban sustainability and crisis management. So today, you will present, or we will discuss the challenges of communities when facing managing risk, especially taking into account the necessity of, for example, in early warning system, the no-code, the low-code solutions, and you will expose various topics, including risk awareness, crisis communication, or community engagement. Well, brief, we thought with Professor Josep Diab that you were a person that could help to people who is in this course, and you will bring to the table some interesting ideas. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ignazi, for inviting me to this discussion, and selamat pagi to our Indonesian friends. I'm happy to share this insight, especially with local officials and people working within municipalities or municipal territorial organization in Indonesia. At first, I'd say that the best way for a territory to be resilient is to be clear about the exact situation on the territory in the coming years. This needs to mobilize data, which is now mainly available, to assess the risk precisely, territory by territory, and not at the global level. We don't care actually about the effects of climate change at the global level. What will be very important for the populations, for the infrastructures, it's what is going to happen place by place. And thanks to data collection from satellites from many different ways now, we are in order to have a clearer view of what's going to happen territory by territory. And actually, Indonesia is one of the best examples regarding this, because I advise on a daily basis to local authorities in France, especially from the cities that are on the sea, to open the eyes, actually, because most of the times they are still closed. And they don't want to accept reality that an important part of their city is going to be underwater by the end of the century. And so they most of the time, the techno-solutionism approach is to say, we're going to build dams. Okay, this is it's not worth it to spend such money. It's much better to use this money to move the city, to move the infrastructures. And that's exactly what Indonesia decided with its capital city. So this is a very good example of resilience. Open the eyes and be realistic about what is going to happen on the territory, and why not decide to move and to rebuild in a build back better approach, to rebuild new houses adapted to climate change, and so on, further than spending billions and billions to protect something that is going anyway to finish under the water. So this is the first solution. Assess the risk territory by territory, and the risks, not only climate risks. Actually, the resilience approach, secondly, is to have this holistic approach. including social, economical, natural, environmental shocks and stresses, and not only climate approach. It's important to characterize territory by territory how what we call the planetary boundaries are crossed or not. We perfectly know, globally, almost all of us, that climate change is a reality and that is going to affect the way of functioning of our territories. But there are 8 other planetary boundaries that condition the existence of human life on Earth. Biodiversity, because biodiversity is us as well. So if we keep on destructing biodiversity, we keep on destructing ourselves. Water, of course. If we don't have clear water anymore, it's a planetary boundaries for human beings. That's clear. Chemical pollutions within the environment. This is going to be, it's already actually one of the worst consequences of Anthropocene, because we're not going to get back these chemicals somewhere. They'll stay forever. And these provide cancers and diseases to billions of people, and so on. So we have 9 planetary boundaries. And what we've been doing in our association, in our organization, is to try to have indicators and measures to consider these 9 planetary boundaries territory by territory. But environmental boundaries are not enough. We also have to face and to consider social ones, of course. Access to food, to health, to education, to democracy, to well-being, actually, to well-being. And so the idea is to shift of paradigm. So far, we considered with this oxymoron, which is sustainable development, that the economy was at the same level than social and environmental matters. So what happened 20 years later? The economy has completely burst and destroyed environmental and social matters. So what we consider now is that economy is not a goal. It's just a tool. It's a tool that has to be regulated, limited, controlled by the people. Because if we leave any entrepreneur to do whatever he wants, he finishes in the space just for fun, like Elon Musk and the others, and creating the same amount of carbon than 50,000 Indonesian people during their whole life. Is that fair, really? So the problem, the deepest problem of resilience is economy, the economy. We have to shift the way economy is running and destroying the world, actually. But to do all this, third part, we need to involve the population, the stakeholders, the deciders, and all the people in charge. We need to sensibilize them to this reality that is not known enough. The reality is clearly, will there still be human beings on Earth within a century? It's not that we're going to face heat waves and so on. We don't care, actually. The main philosophical issue is that humanity will survive or not within a century. If we keep on with the economy running the world like we do now, it won't. That's clearly said by the scientists and by the science. So do we accept that and say, okay, it didn't worth it, let's go and just continue and finish? Or do we become aware that it's now or never that we shift. But to shift, we have to shift the economy in order to have resilient territories, because it's economy that destroys the world. And so we really need to work on that. And to sensibilize the population is the key. Training programs, discussions, debating everywhere about what's going to happen on their territory, in front of their door, not at the world level within a century. Nobody cares. The topic is that what is going to happen within the coming decade in the front of your door, your own door. Once you know that, and that because you mobilize data, and that you are able to discuss that with the population, it's much easier to empower the population in order to accept, to agree to shift. But if we don't shift anyway, it's not early warning systems or whatever that are going to be useful. These warning systems are going to be useful once we shift. Because anyway, if we shift, even if we were shifting right now, we perfectly know that the next 50 years are going to be very hard and tough for our societies. So we need these early warning systems, but maybe to end on this, for this first part, I strongly advise not to count too much on technology for this, but to count on humanity and human systems better than technological systems. Why? Because as you may know, most of the time, when a city faces a catastrophe, one of the, whatever it is, a flood, a storm, a earthquake, whatever, one of the first consequences is the blackout, no access to energy. So if all our systems that are going to supposed to help our territories to be resilient, depend on electricity or internet, it's not worth it. Don't do it. Don't spend all this money. And I know many private companies are going to say, for sure, they promise the moon, but it's wrong. You need energy. Energy is the key. And most of the time, so you have to really think about early warning systems, low-tech ones that can work even without energy. That's really my advice. Because once you consider that the sensors in one IA is going to manage the thing, you don't see the catastrophe coming because you trust the machines. But if the machines just stop, you lost. And so I really, of course, we need to be helped by the machines, by the technology, but we need the plan B in case of this technology doesn't work because of the shock. That's clear. That's easy to understand. But most of the time, we give too much trust on technology. Je vais peut-être me relancer avec une autre question, parce que je pars beaucoup d'autres et je pars tout seul. Hein. Je t'entends plus.
Thank you very much. C'est super, je disais.
Tu vas prendre des bouts, de toute façon, tu prends pas tout, hein, tu coupes. Hein.
Oui, on va couper. Donc, okay, thank you very much, Sébastien. It's very interesting what you are explaining, because yes, if you look at, for example, the campaign that UN is promoting about early warnings for all, in their strategy, they are relying a lot on satellite, but you can find in this strategy also that it's important to be on, they say, low code or low tech or no tech technologies. So now we would like to also to have your insights about the Paris experience. You have been a chief resilience officer in Paris, and you had some insightful thoughts on the post-attack in Paris, or you have been involved on these thoughts about community engagement. There are some lessons learned from Paris that you think outside of high technology that we all know it will be very useful if the technology is able to work. What other points are key when there is a crisis situation in populations?
I could give one example to illustrate what I just mentioned about the role of technology. Talking about one crisis I experienced within the city of Paris with a main flood of the Seine River. That was not expected because it was in June, and in June, so far, we had never faced such event. It was mostly in winter, during winter, and we were informed that the river was growing, and that it was very dangerous, and because we were not too far from the levels of the main centennial ones. And so if Paris experienced now the same flood that it experienced a century ago, and which was a centennial one, it would be worse, actually, because we depend much more on technology, which is not resilient regarding this risk. And I remember this anecdote, which is very representative of what I just mentioned. I was in part of the crisis board, and we were managing on a daily basis, hour by hour, the crisis. It was at the same moment that the Euro Football Cup in Paris, and we had civil servants on the banks of the river that were supposed to set up installations for the football. It was something like a press village, or that was supposed to be set up on the riverbank. And the people were starting to build the thing, but were calling the boarding crisis, saying, "Are you sure that we should keep on? Because the river is really high now, and we're afraid." But within the crisis board, we were stuck on the screen of the computer, watching at was a technical sensor from the state, the national state, was giving us for info. And I remember the head of the crisis department answering to the people, "No, you're wrong. The water is not growing because the computer says that it's okay. So keep on." And the guys they kept on working. And after another hour, they said, "Sorry, but you do whatever you want. But now we have the foot on the water. So it's dangerous for the people. We leave." And the guy said, "No, you don't have the feet on the water. The computer says no. So please stay." Of course, they left. We lost for tens of thousands of material that left on the river because, and afterwards, 10 days later, we discovered that the sensor was broken. And the whole protection of the whole city was depending on one sensor, one technical tool, and no one has in thought, maybe it could be broken. And so we were, for me, it's dangerous to do that. It's dangerous. And so if we had trust the low-tech warning system, for instance, Facebook, and all the people taking pictures of the flood and the water growing, it would have been much more relevant and precise than the technical tool provided by a factory that said it's perfect. And so that's an example, and it's free, by the way, and it's a free warning system. It's a volunteer warning system. So I'm not saying that we should erase technology, but we need both. That's the thing. We need both. Of course, it's a help to be, for instance, in case of the flood, we just have 48 hours to react. So we need to be warned as soon as possible. If it's in the middle of the night, we're not going to be warned by someone. It has to be by a machine. So of course we need the machine system. But to be resilient is to always consider what is the plan B if the machine fails. I could give another example of community engagement, taking example of my activity in the city of Paris. Um, we often use this publication, scientific publication from Aldrich, a US researcher that studied a lot what happened in Japan in 2011 after the Fukushima earthquake and tsunami and so on. And they officially know, they officially created a link between a scientific relation between the number of deaths when a village faces a catastrophe and the level of pre-existing social link within the village before the catastrophe. In the villages where people were used to do things together, were organizing parties or religious ceremonies, cultural activity in the street, where people are used to do things together, zero death. In the villages where there is insecurity at night, low cultural and social activities, much more death. Who are the death? Disabled, elderly, people who are alone actually by themselves. So it's very important to consider then once the technical infrastructures are overpassed, once the emergency organizations and systems are completely overwhelmed, what stays? The ability to the citizens to support each other. But we need to strengthen that. We need to prepare that. We need to train that to provide as the public sector, as the municipalities, the knowledge, the tools, the materials to the people in order to leave them manage the crisis by themselves, because we'll need them when we face a major event, because we won't be enough within our municipalities and public sectors. And so the first action of Paris Strategy Action Plan is to create a volunteer network of citizens and to train them each week, each month, to have lists of these citizens that we can count on during a crisis, building by building. And there are the eyes, the ears, and the voice of the municipality everywhere on the territory, even if it's complicated to reach them. Because as Paris is a small city, it's easy to reach one point to another one by foot, low tech, and to have this kind of messages that are transmitted. And more than all, we want these people to be trained to repair social vulnerabilities around them, around their home. Elderly, disabled, mothers alone with many kids, and so on. And to, if they are, and what we could assess with this program that is still running 5 years later, 6 years later, is that once you convince the people to be ready to help the elderly persons that are two floors upstairs in case of major crisis, actually they do that on a daily basis. They help on a daily basis. They propose help to go shopping, so it strengthens social link on a daily basis, even if there is no crisis. And that's good for the territory. And that's good for the people. And that's good for the municipality. So it's a win-win thing to count on the people before the crisis. It's a win-win because it helps before the crisis to strengthen social link. And it will be very helpful during the crisis when it will occur.
That's very, very interesting. And yes, you can see many situations where this social link is the one who helps people to survive. No, like to not to let older people alone, or people that live in areas that are not covered by the emergency services. So let me know, what do you think about, because you talk about different stakeholders in the emergency services, in the resilience. What do you think could be then in this process the role of there is the local authorities, the public sector, but sometimes there is the private sector. There is sometimes you can find examples of, I don't know, in some disasters, there were banks that were like giving loans without asking nothing in exchange, just writing down the name, and or supermarkets collaborating, like volunteer companies. Which do you think could be the role here on local and private sector, especially in countries where where developing countries, or also in islands? What do you think about they could
The role
bring?
of the private sector is key in resilience and crisis management. Firstly, if the private sector work on its own resilience by itself before, not to depend on the public sector to be resilient, firstly. Because if they're not prepared, everything stops. The buses companies, gas or energy providing, and so on and so on. And so it's the same. Actually, it's as important of the public sector in the running of the society. So they need to be prepared. And in France, for instance, I don't know how it is in Indonesia, it's in the law. Each big company, and this is the lack of the law in France, because it only considers the biggest companies or the companies in charge of critical services or essential services. By the law, they have to build every year and to update an emergency plan to assess risks that can block their activity. But it's an old-fashioned way. For instance, in these risks, you don't have, what if a huge tanker boat is stuck in the Panama Canal? It's not planned as a crisis because we consider earthquake and so on. But this is an economic crisis that has huge consequences on the functioning of the cities because everything is interconnected. And so the idea also is to say, hey, please update what you consider as a crisis. And we help them to do that in France, and they are more and more aware about it because actually, they perfectly know that they're going to lose a lot of money if they're not ready. The most cynical evolution of this is the insurance world that already decided not to insure anymore entire parts of territories everywhere in the world, saying, no, this is too concerned by risk, so I won't insure you anyway. I'm leaving. So I'm not sure that many private sectors are going to stay there if they're not, they can be insured. Then we need to consider that what is an essential private sector. For instance, in my former position as a chief resilience officer within the 100 Resilience Cities network that had been launched a couple of years ago, I had many discussions with my counterpart of New Orleans, which has experienced the Katrina hurricane event. And he told me that the first resilient signal after the catastrophe that could be sent to the population was to reopen the local shops, the local grocery shops, the local baker, the ultra local shops. Because for the people, it means even psychological speaking, that life is getting back, is coming back. And so it's rare that we consider a very small local shop as key in a resilience strategy, but it is. And so every part of the private sector has a role to play within a crisis. You mentioned the banks, that's a very good example, but it's also the hotels that can help people. It's also actually everyone, except the bullshit economy. That is not useful on a daily basis, and that is not useful at all during a crisis that creates superficial things just to create economical growth and pollution. I'm talking about the real economy, the historical one, which had always been efficient and necessary, and that we always will be. Not all the rest that was just created 50 years ago. And so this means that for a local authority, we need to find the ways to involve the private sector. And it's extremely difficult to involve the private sector in advance, and not only during the crisis, in the processes, in the resilience processes. Because the private sector considers that it's not its business, because they don't have time enough to participate in meetings and so on, because they face many difficulties on a daily basis, and so on. But for instance, we just experienced and have been experiencing right now a major flood event in France, in the northern part of France. Second flood within a month, second centennial flood within a month. And what we can read on the news this morning is that most of the factories there already decided to move. They just want to quit, to move the municipalities that is concerned. And so that's a way to involve them in the resilience process, to say, hey, if you don't participate, you will just disappear. And so we don't ask you to participate to help the public sector as the people. It's not your aim. But if you want a business continuity in your own enterprise, you need to participate in the global resiliency of the territory. It's in your interest, your own interest. And why not? You should fund it.
Well, yes, well, you are touching this key point of involving this private sector, especially also in tourist areas. Yes. Where there are hotels, where they don't like to talk about this because it's not. People doesn't like to think that he's going to a place where a disaster can occur. So it's kind of difficult place, no? And some economies that are based on tourists.
I think it's very difficult, especially in these places. But thinking about that, for the countries which depends a lot on tourism, they have to open the eyes about the coming world. It's finished. We already reached the peak of the number of global tourists in the world. In the coming decades, it will decrease because we won't have energy enough to transport all this tourism. So, strategically speaking, for the resilience of the economy of Indonesia, the main thing would be how to create prosperity without tourism. That's or with 10% of the tourism we have now. Because if we want our children to survive, we need to stop mass tourism. If we keep on mass tourism, we won't have human beings anymore within a century. So mass tourism has to disappear. And or it's not worth it. Okay, we'll keep on with the carbon emissions, and then we'll disappear. Okay, and for 50 years, we'll be rich. Great. And then no humans anymore on Earth. So that's stupid. It's completely stupid as human beings. So for Indonesia, a real strategical resilience approach would be to prepare economy after tourism from now. And we could help for that. We would love to do it.
Yes, that would be a very, very interesting project to start the tourism and resilience in countries who can now maybe do what other countries, advanced countries, didn't do in the past, where they should do it. So that would be very, very interesting. So, finally, to a little bit to conclude our conversation here, for international lessons. Well, you already say it, but give us some lessons on risk management practices from other countries and cities. Maybe not only Paris, you have also global vision because you were in the 100 Resilient Cities network. What will be this advice for countries that are islands, like in Indonesia, Malaysia, all these areas where they are experimenting these climate change impacts, but they need their economies to grow, so they have to balance between growth and resilience. What will be your advice to them?
One more time, if all the southern countries reach the same level, the same economical level of the north, humanity disappears. So why not? But if the goal is for the southern world to become with the same way of life of the north, there is no issue possible. So just assess it, actually. And so that's mathematical, physical, that's not political. Huh? That's completely physical, mathematical, regarding the number of people, the consumption of resources, and the pollutions that are created by these consumptions. If we keep on like that, humanity will disappear for sure. That's all what the scientists say. They completely agree on that now. The topic is not we're going to face heat waves. The topic is humanity will disappear. So don't fake to be resilient in that case. Don't fake and just assess that, okay, we still have one generation to live, and just have fun and grow, consume. That's it. But if we don't do that, anyway, it's not worth it, because all what we create, our plans, will just disappear. So that's the thing. And we're saying, what we've been saying in the northern municipalities in France regarding this issue of economical development in the south is that if we want the south to reach the economical south, to reach a certain level of quality of life regarding health, education, fooding, access to water, democracy, and so on. The only solution is that the northerns decreases, because the resources that are used are the same in the north and south, and they are in a limited quantity. But economy from now still officially considers in its theory that natural resources are eternal, and that there is no limit. So that's the key problem of our economy. And so, as they are in a limited quantity, we can't expect any development in the south if the north keeps on developing. We are overdeveloped on the north, completely overdeveloped. We spend energy and use resources for bullshit things on a daily basis, and we consider that is a good life. And the whole world wants to do that. I know that it's horrible from a northern guy to say, no, don't do it. I took advantage of it, but you can't. But it's stupid if our own children will disappear. That's what I want to say. And so we really need to decrease in the north to slow down our economy, our activity, our productions, our consumption, in order to the south to be allowed or able to use resources, even fossil fuels, energy, minerals, materials, to create hospitals, schools, but not to create a ski plant in the desert. Just as an example, do we really need to do that as human beings? How stupid are we? Not looking at the reality of the disparition of our species. I'm every morning thinking how stupid we are. We are really one of the worst, even the worst, the unique, living species able to auto-erase. I think known in the history of species, known species had ever done that. We are the only ones. We auto-destroy ourselves. Too bad.
So yes, so well, your vision of the shift that we need, it's I think it's very important and very we need to do something. So just to conclude, what give us some kind of faith. So what we can do to face this future, to what we can do, because to have
First,
some.
we need to the only thing we need globally at the world level, but especially at the in the northern developed world, is a cultural revolution. We don't need any tools. We don't need any data. We don't. Of course, we need it, but I mean that's not enough. Without cultural revolution, what are we going to do with these data? It's exactly the Don't Look Up movie. We had the data. We could see the stuff. That's exactly the situation now. We have all the data saying that we're going to disappear, but we don't want to see them. We don't care. We don't use them. We do as if they were not existing. So it's a revolution, a cultural revolution at the world level. And sometimes I'm using the example of the human rights. When the Human Rights Declaration was created in France a couple of centuries ago, it was just a small local thing in one country. And it became a paradigm for half of the world. Maybe we should do that now with this cultural revolution, saying, firstly, we need to consider that we are not outside of nature, but we are nature. That's the main vision problem. Nature is not only something we can use to earn money. It's something we depend on to survive. That's another approach. And then there is no solution that is not global, local and global. And so governance is a key. Governance is the main key of resilience. Actually, we used to enter by the solutions approach. In order to be resilient, you can set up this kind of solution for this kind of infrastructure and so on. But if the stakeholders, as you perfectly mentioned earlier, are not around the table, it won't be implemented. So firstly, the governance and the right stakeholders around the table to discuss the clear future of the territory. then the solutions will be created by this governance, adapted to each territory, to each specificity, to each history, to each money, to each. And so I would say data and awareness in order to build the cultural revolution, and governance, then the solutions will be easy.
Well, thank you very much, Sébastien. This was, I think, a very useful conversation for people taking this course and deeping into the resilience issue, the early warning system, the risk management for cities, I will say, around the world, in Indonesia or in Paris or in Europe. Because years ago, that was, do you remember, years ago, disaster risk reduction was something from the countries that are far from Western countries, and now it's everywhere. We have seen,
Yes.
we see this. So thank you very much for your time, and we take notes on your proposal on projects around private sector tourism resilience that could be interesting. Thank you.
Thank you very much.